Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, Wisteria here. So this is a fairy tale called Tritill, Litill and the Birds. Once upon a time there lived a princess who was so beautiful and so good that everybody loved her. Her father almost died of grief when one day she disappeared. And though the whole kingdom was searched, she could not be found in any corner of it. In despair, the king ordered that whoever could find her should have her for his wife. This made all the young men search afresh, but they were no more successful than before, and returned sorrowfully to their homes. Now there dwelled, not far from the place, a man and a wife who had 3 sons. The 2 eldest were allowed by their parents to do just as they liked, but the youngest was always obliged to give way to his brothers. When they were all grown up, the eldest told his father that he meant to go away and see the world. The old people were very unhappy, but they said nothing and began to prepare for his travels. When everything was ready, he bade them farewell. He rode for some miles through a wood and came out on a bare hillside. Here he sat down to rest and, pulling out his wallet, prepared to eat his dinner. He had only eaten a few mouthfuls when an old man, badly dressed, passed by, seeing the food, and he approached the young man. "Young man, could you not spare a little?" "Not I indeed," answered he. "Why, I've scarcely enough for myself. If you want food, you must earn it." And the beggar went on. After the young man had finished his dinner, he walked on for several hours, till he reached a second hill, where he threw himself down on the grass and took some bread and milk from his wallet. While he was eating and drinking, there came by an old man, yet more wretched than the first, and begged for a few mouthfuls. But instead of food, he only got hard words, and limped sadly away. Towards the evening the young man reached an open space in the wood. By this time he thought he would like some supper. The birds saw the food, and flew around his head hoping for some crumbs. But he threw stones at them and frightened them off. Then he began to wonder where he should sleep. Not where he was, for that was bare and cold, and though he had walked a long way and was tired, he dragged himself up and went on, seeking shelter. At length he saw a deep sort of hole or cave under a great rock, and it seemed quite empty. He went in and lay down in the corner. About midnight he was awakened by a noise, and, peeping out, he beheld a terrible ogress approaching. He implored her not to hurt him, but to let him stay there for the rest of the night, to which she consented, on condition that he should spend the next day in doing any task which she so asked of him. To this the young man agreed, and turned over and went to sleep again. In the morning the ogress bade him sweep the dust out of the cave, and to have it clean before her return in the evening, otherwise it would be the worse for him. Then she left. The young man began to clean the floor of the cave, but try as he would to move it, the dirt still stuck in place. He soon gave up the task and sat sulkily in the corner, wondering what punishment the ogress would find for him, and why she had set him to do such an impossible thing. He had not long to wait. After the ogress came home, before he knew what his punishment was to be, she just gave one look at the floor of the cave and dealt him a blow on the head which cracked his skull, and there was an end of him. Meanwhile, his next brother grew tired of staying at home and let his parents have no rest till they had consented that he also should go out and see the world. He also met the two old beggars, who prayed for a little of his bread and milk. But this young man had never been taught to help other people, so he turned a deaf ear and finished his dinner. By and by, too, he came to the cave, and was bidden by the ogress to clean the floor. But he was no more successful than his brother, and his fate was the same. Anyone would have thought that when the old people had only one son left, that at least they would have been kind to him, even if they did not love him. But for some reason, they could hardly bear the sight of him, though he tried much harder to make them comfortable than his brothers had ever done in their lives. So when he asked to leave and to go out into the world, they gave the consent at once and seemed quite glad to be rid of him. Besides the pleasure of seeing the world, the youth was very anxious to discover what had become of his brothers, and he determined to trace, as far as he could, the way that they must have gone. He followed the road and led from his father's cottage to the hill, where he sat down to rest, and, saying to himself, he did, "I am pretty sure my brothers must have stopped here, and I will do the same." He was hungry as well as tired, and took out some food. He was just going to begin to eat when the old man appeared. The young man at once broke off some of the bread, begging the old man to sit down beside him, treating him as if he was an old friend. At last the stranger rose and said to him, "If you are ever in trouble, call me, and I will help you. My name is Tritill." Then he vanished. At the next hill he met with a second old man, and to him also he gave food and drink. When this old man had finished, he said, just like the first, "If you ever want help in the smallest thing, call to me. My name is Litill." The young man walked on till he reached the open space in the wood, where he stopped for dinner. In a moment all the birds in the world seemed to be flying round his head, and he crumbled some of the bread for them and watched them dart down to pick it up. When they had cleared off every crumb, the largest bird, with the gayest plumage, said to him, "If you are in trouble and need help, say, 'My birds, come to me,' and we will come." Then they flew away. Towards evening, the young man had reached the cave, the exact cave where his brothers had met their deaths, and, like them, he thought it would be a good place to sleep in. Looking round, he saw some pieces of dead men's clothes and of their bones. The sight made him shiver, but he would not move away, and resolved to await the return of the ogress, for such he knew she must be. Very soon she came striding in, and he asked politely if she would give him a night's lodging. She answered as before, that he might stay on one condition, that he should do any work that she might set him, till the next morning. So the bargain being concluded, the young man curled himself up in his corner and went to sleep. The dirt lay thicker than ever on the floor of the cave when the young man took the spade and began his work. He could not clear it any more than his brothers had done, and at last the spade itself stuck in the earth so that he could not pull it out. The youth stared at it in despair. Then the old beggar's words flashed into his mind, and he cried, "Tritill, Tritill, come help me." And Tritill stood beside him and asked what he wanted. The youth told him all his story, and when he finished, the old man said, "Spade and shovel, do your duty." And they danced about the cave, till in a short time there was not a speck of dust left on the floor. As soon as it was quite clean, Tritill went on his way. With a light heart, the young man awaited the return of the ogress. When she came in, she looked carefully round, and then said to him, "You did not do that quite alone. However, as the floor is clean, I will leave your head on. The following morning the ogress told the young man that he must take all the feathers out of her pillows and spread them to dry in the sun. But if one feather was missing when she came back at night, his head should pay for it. The young man fetched the pillows and shook out all the feathers, and oh, what quantities of them there were! Suddenly a breeze sprang up, and in a moment the feathers were floating everywhere, even dancing high up in the sky. At first the youth tried to collect them again, but he soon found that it was no use, and he cried in despair, "Tritill, Litill, and my birds, come help me." He had hardly said the words, when there they all were, and when the birds had brought all the feathers back again, Tritill and Litill and he put them away in the pillows, as the ogress had bidden him. But one feather they kept out, and told the young man that if the ogress missed it, he was to thrust it up her nose. Then they all vanished, Tritill, Litill, and the birds. As soon as the ogress returned home, she flung herself on the bed, and the whole cave quivered under her. The pillows were soft and full, instead of being empty, which surprised her, but that did not content her. The ogress got up, shook out all of the pillowcases one by one, began to count the feathers in each. "If one is missing, I will have your head," said the ogress. And at that the young man drew the feather from his pocket and thrust it up her nose, crying, "If you want your feather, here it is." "You did not sort those feathers alone," answered the ogress calmly. "However, I will let that pass." That night the young man slept completely soundly, as before. When morning arrived, the ogress told him his work that day would be to slay one of her great oxen, to cook its heart, and to make drinking cups of its horns, before she returned home. "There are 50 oxen," added she, "and you must guess which of the herd I want killed. If you guess right, tomorrow you shall be free to go wherever you will, and you shall choose 3 things as a reward for your service. But if you slay the wrong ox, your head shall pay for it." When he was left alone, the young man stood thinking for a little, and then he called, "Tritill, Litill, come to my help." In that moment he saw them far away, driving the biggest ox the youth had ever seen. When they drew near, Tritill killed it. Litill took out its heart for the young man to cook, and they both began to quickly turn the horns into drinking cups. The old man warned the youth that he must ask the ogress for the chest which stood at the foot of her bed, for whatever lay on top of the bed, and for what lay under the side of the cave. The young man thanked them for all their help and their counsel, and Tritill and Litill then took leave of him, saying that for the present he would need them no more. Scarcely had they disappeared when the ogress came back and found everything ready just as she ordered. Before she sat down to eat the heart, she turned to the young man and said, You did not do that all alone, my friend, but nevertheless, I will keep my word. Tomorrow you shall go your way." So they went to bed and slept till dawn. When the sun rose, the ogress awoke the young man and called to him to choose any 3 things of her house. "I choose," answered he, "the chest which stands at the foot of your bed, whatever lies on the top of the bed, and whatever is under the side of the cave." "You did not choose those things by yourself, my friend," said the ogress. "But what I have promised, that will I do." And then she gave him his reward. The thing which lay on top of the bed was given first. And this thing on top of the bed turned out to be the lost princess. The chest, which stood at the foot of the bed, was given second and proved to be full of gold and precious stones. The last was what was under the side of the cave. He found to be a great ship with oars and sails that went of itself as well on land as in water. "You are the luckiest man that ever was born," said the ogress, and she went out of the cave as usual. With much difficulty, the youth put the heavy chest on his shoulders and carried it on board the ship, the princess walking by his side. Then he took the helm and steered the vessel back to her father's kingdom. The king's joy at receiving back his lost daughter was so great that he almost fainted. But when he recovered himself, he made the young man tell him how everything had really happened. "You have found her, and you shall marry her," said the king. And so it was done. And this is the end of the story. So that's the brilliant tale of Tritill, Litill, and the birds. And if you remember, there is another tale that's quite similar, just as most of the others. They do seem to have similarities, don't they? Thank you for listening, and please hit that like, share if you can, and if you're at YouTube and you have not yet subscribed, please consider doing so because it really helps. Many blessings.